it's Joe, and as I've been working on building up my tool collection in the shop, I was recently given a bandsaw. And just so you can see, I'm 5'8". It's noticeably taller than me, although it is sitting on a piano dolly that's about 5 inches tall, so it's only maybe this tall. So it's about the same height as I am, a little bit taller. It was a kit. Let's see if I can hold this up here. It was made by Gillum Manufacturing Incorporated in St. Charles, Missouri. It was available as a kit, and I'll also put some pictures from the brochure. I don't have the plans, and I'm not sure if the gentleman who gave me this has plans or not. Evidently original factory rubber or neoprene or something that was on it. Looks like he had maybe put some tape around it to kind of help hold it in place. Not sure. But anyway, I've already taken that off. Okay, working on the bandsaw wheels in the kitchen, as you can tell. And the place is clean. Spotless. Anyway, one of the things you can see here, when I took the old wheel or tire off the wheel, it leaves a fair amount of kind of glue behind. What I've decided to use is just one of these kind of long knife, box knives, where you can break off bits of knife. And this one unfortunately got left outside in the rain, and it's so rusty it's not ever really going to be terribly sharp again. So I'm kind of using it just as a scraper. So if I just scrape across here, you can see how it's taken it right off. Pretty quick, not too painful. On the ears maybe. And you kind of have to rock it up a little bit to the side and then kind of just slowly rotate it over. So putting on the tire onto the wheel is a little bit on the difficult side. So per the documentation provided by Sulphur Grove Tools and an online web YouTube video, shows you how to make a little tool to put the tire on. So even that proved difficult. So I had already seen on Amazon where they were saying heat up the tire. Well, our hot water heater is currently heating to about 140. So I filled the sink with some hot water and let them soak for a little while. So here's the little tool that they recommend making. It's not anything too special. It's just a piece of 2x4 with a couple of 1/2 inch, 7/16, whatever size dowels, piece of PVC tubing. Now they show a nice handle on the tube as well, so you could like crank it around and around. But it seems like this works as well. At least I already have the other one on, let's put it that way. Start by getting a good handhold over here. Oops. Just about there. And I'll push it down. And then I recommend turning it a time or two to just kind of equalize the tension all the way around. And the tire for these particular wheels is a little bit on the wide side. So I'm just kind of putting all the excess on this side. Slowly work my piece of PVC off there. And if I could push hard enough on there to get that out. And then work that on. Just flip it over. All right, and that's on there. Now I can just take a sharp knife and slice the rest off. So that's how you put the new tires on the wheel. It's got this heavy-duty piece of wood here, and I'll see if I can get up there high enough. You can see it's basically an actual 2x4, maybe a slight bit bigger. Then it's got a couple other 2x4s, one on either side, and then it's got plywood. So one of the things that I would like to do to beef up the top, so maybe I can put a little bit more tension on it and run slightly larger size blades, because it had recommended only up to 3/8 of an inch wide blade, which again for an 18-inch saw seems a little small. So I'm going to put some additional 2x4s over on this side, and then also rotate this around. You can see the back side here. So I'm going to stack some 2x4s back here and beef that up as well. So that'll run all the way from the floor clear up to the top. And then, as I've seen on some of the other homemade wood bandsaws, instead of having these pieces, which you can see they're kind of loose, and they only go out as far as holding this, they don't go out as far as holding the end of it solid, which is where the bandsaw guide is at. So I'd like to also strengthen that. So I'm going to take these pieces off and put pieces of 2x4 that will extend all the way out from clear back in here. So we're going to do so anyway, here's kind of another shot of where we're going with this and the clamps that I've got going in place. So we'll give that an hour, and then I'll come back out and put the next piece in and probably screw it in as well. Okay, so I've started gluing some spine onto the back side. You can see from the top in shot here. That originally there was only really 3 pieces of hardwood and then a piece of plywood that was clamping everything together, or holding everything together. It's all screwed together. There wasn't any glue, so I'm going to go ahead and glue the spine just because I think the spine really needs to be super strong. So I'll let this probably sit about an hour before I do much more to it. Black like bearings on it, and kind of cool, you could probably can't really see this, but if you twist the lock collar, it's not concentric, which you can probably see better there, and it's closer on this side than it is up here on this side. So as you twist it around, it locks it in place against the shaft, and then so it's kind of got one hole here, like you can put a wrench in and twist it. Then once it's twisted tight, you lock it down with the little Allen set screw. You can also see that same shape on here, where it's narrower over on this side and fatter over here. The bearings actually aren't in too bad a shape. The thing that kind of concerns me about them though is they are pretty loose in the holder. So just to be on the safe side, I went ahead and I ordered up a new set of pillow block bearings because I wanted to potentially upgrade the power of the saw a little. According to the instructions, they recommend a 1/2 horse motor. Pillow block bearings showed up, so I've already been playing around a little bit with how it balances. So, and it's clearly out of balance, and with the better bearings on it, you can see it's stopping within a range down here from here to here, just depending on which direction you go. And I mean, the bearings aren't so smooth that it floats back and forth super easy, so we'll definitely need to be adding some weight up here on the top side to counterbalance that. Okay, so I have changed out bearings, or at least mostly. I pulled out the 4 bolts around the perimeter, and as you can see, I don't have actually 2 of them completely back in. I just have the bolts run through, and that's partially because the bolts aren't ready to really go in, because I've got 3 more 2x4s. You see full height of the spine, half of it's now in. So I've got to put it, before I put in the next one, I'll drill the hole through the 2x4 that this one will go through. And then I'm also actually going to put some level of 2x4 over here behind this one as well. And then that one will be longer too. So I'm totally beefing up the box here. So anyway, I can drop this back through, and you can see the new bearings down here. And they come probably with some minor level of lube in them, but not enough. So I put some more lube in, and you can see just a tiny bit of lube kind of starting to ooze out the side. Now feeling much smoother. So anyway, and the next thing to do, so I've been chugging away on this. It's currently laying down on the front side, and well, one of the sides anyway. And I have put in a plywood and oak brace. I used 5-inch long, 1/4-inch screws, lag bolts. I countersunk them in just a touch so they'd be flush, so I can glue the next piece of 2x4 onto the side of the spine. So you can see we're now 4 wide, and I'm going 6. And then we'll actually put the original piece back on as well. I had to trim that down just a touch to get it to fit, but that will happen no problem. I actually probably won't trim it down because that's reducing strength. No need for that. On the bottom of the unit, I took a piece of 1/2-inch plywood roof decking and surrounded it with 2x4s on the bottom that are screwed in quite nicely. And then on the spine side, I'm calling this the spine up here, all these 2x4s. On the spine side, I have glued this piece to here, but the remainder of the pieces over here and the one on the front are not glued, they're just screwed. So that way I can still I can still pull it apart if I want to, but the spine I want to be so solid that it's just rock solid. All right, the next thing I wanted to do, and it's kind of hard to tell, I actually put a blade on, is I wanted to find out for sure that I have the right size blade. And as it turns out, 126 inches is a little bit too long. I think probably 124 would have been okay, but seeing how it's all torn apart, all this really means is that I have to raise up this piece about 1 inch. So I'll be raising that up 1 inch, but anyway, as you can see, I can spin, I guess if I do it this way, the drive wheel, you can see that it spins both, and with just a tiny bit of adjustment on the upper wheel, I was able to get it to track right down the middle of at least the top wheel. It's not quite in the middle on the bottom, so I'll probably need to pull the bottom wheel towards the front of the machine just a touch. So down here, it's got a little handle you can rotate, and the saw then pivots, which is a nice feature. Not super smooth. Table's still pretty flat, so I may go ahead and reuse that. And I'm assuming the hinge point here has just come loose or something. Oh, it looks like it's completely undone. So I'll have to take that off and do a bunch of work to that. Or I may just do a much better hinge system for it. And then it'll just be really super solid in the way I'd like it. So anyway, one of the ultimate goals would be to maybe do some resawing, not necessarily of huge stock, and I don't really need an 18-inch for resawing that I'd be doing, but to resaw some 2 or 3 inch thick stock mahogany, maybe 3 to 5 inches, 6 inches wide, down into 3/8 inch strips to make hammered dulcimers. So anyway, already made Shig Shop Plans sander, drum sander, 25.5 inches wide. One of the improvements that I'm working on the saw is the table tilt. The way it had worked before, literally you cut out the table to size and you put on some Formica and you installed some hinges here and here. And this is one of those hinges. It's got a couple little screws, and of course in this case it was MDF that they use for the tabletop, which would probably be pretty common, I would guess. It's less expensive and it's pretty stable. But anyway, when you start screwing screws into the side of it, that's not a terribly good thing. And then it did have, you know, a single countersunk screw going down this way, and then there were a couple of bolts on the front face holding it on to this structure down below. But it's ready to start cutting out ponies. This is the start of that. So this piece here will mount on the side of the saw, and its center point up here somewhere will be perfectly in line with the blade. Then the tabletop itself will mount to across here and here, and I still have to cut those off. One of the things you have to do is make sure that I've got a little strip of paper here that's the same thickness of the top. So when I cut that off, it would be as if that thickness actually extends above here. And then there's a slot in here where I'll have a bolt run through, or a piece of all thread with a nut on, a nut and encapsulated nut, and then a little radius part up here for that to slide in. And then down on the bottom, there will be a handle to lock it down. So I'll have to lock down probably the front and the back. May get away with just the front because they're pretty big and beefy. Basically what I did to design it is I started off with the point up here that's at the top of the table, in effect right where the blade would be. And then I drew a 12-inch or 6-inch radius, 12-inch circle, and then a 3-inch circle. So I've got 3 inches of wood here, and then I went out 3 more inches, so out to 9 inches radius for the outside. Then inside here there are some open areas, so as this slides through, you can see that it slides through a range of motion. But it won't go any further than that because the bolt's going to stop it. And over here would be 45-degree table down. So it'll have a range from basically 90 or maybe a touch more just to make sure, and then all the way to 45. So that's kind of what I've got going here, just so you can see some of the pieces involved in that. So I've already glued part of those pieces together. I will show you the pieces. Kind of lift the tripod up here. Good old 20-year-old Bogan with a much newer fluid head on it. Anyway, and it's cold out today. It's been snowing. The roads are still closed. We can't even drive from here to Bakersfield or Mojave. So anyway, the part that is going to attach to the table has actually 4 parts. I've already glued on part of the parts, and I already had cut these out. Now I did it with the bandsaw. I could have done it with a router, which would have probably been much faster, but I guess I'm just kind of old school, and I kind of like going this way because that way I can kind of sand it down to where it fits really nice. So you have to sand both sides, and you can see it fits pretty nice and slides in there pretty easy. So anyway, but I've already glued on these 2 pieces, and this would be my 90 spot. So the blade, when the blade is 90 degrees to the upper surface, and then rotate it over, that's 45. And then this piece goes on. Now sort of the trick here, Let's see if I can get this figured out real quick. I used a couple of pieces like this, and I take the piece that it's going to sit into and put it down there. And I lined up all these pieces so that this piece, which matches these radiuses perfect, comes in connection with both the bottom and the top. So then once I've got the pieces rotated around to where they look right, then I took some clamps and I clamped it this way and here, and that holds the two pieces exactly in the same plane, so to speak. And then of course you can clamp them top and, you know, at the ends and in the middle, and let the glue dry. Once that's done, then you can release all these clamps, and now you've got two pieces that are like this one, where you can see that the two halves just line up perfect. Now then, another one of the things, so once that's glue is dried, then this one would be ready to use. And the neat thing there is it then becomes the template for gluing this. So if I take the piece that's now already glued, so because its two halves, outside halves, are glued up and ready to go and concentric together, then I can glue these pieces on. Now I did this a little different because literally this can actually slide in, well, will slide in here, so as to help hold the two parts together so they're not kind of flopping around. So I'll glue on, once I've got, actually I can glue these two pieces onto the bottom, and then once that's done, then I can slide this up in here, put the other piece on top, and just like before, put the clamp here and here across, and then clamps to hold it down, probably 3 clamps there. That holds everything together, and that's how you make the trunnion. It was a kit, so it included parts like the blade guide here. It included the wheels, and on the back side, the adjustment for the wheels so you can tilt the wheel in and out to get the blade to run true. This is where you tighten the blade up. And then down on the bottom side, a motor mount, and the upper wheel, and then the pulley you can see back inside there. It didn't include the pulley for the motor, didn't include the motor, included different hardware for the table. So anyway, some of the things that I updated on the unit, I used a lot of the original wood that the original builder used with it. But there were a lot of things that I updated. So when I first got it, you could grab the table and go like this, and the whole thing moved. And of course you can see the whole thing moving now, but it's on casters down there, which aren't terribly good. Maybe I should have picked out better casters than Harbor Freight, but I don't think I'm going to be rolling it around all that much, and I'm not really that concerned. Anyway, so some of the things I updated. Well, first off, it seemed like the whole top of the unit, when I started torquing things down, would want to bend down. So it seemed like this whole, I'm calling it a spine for lack of a better term, I beefed up by adding in 6 pieces of redwood 2x4s that I happen to have on hand. Now, one of the things I did with the 2x4s is I start off by cutting the 2x4s down so they're really more like 3 1/4 wide. I cut the radius off the edges. Now I've rounded this one and this one, but the rest of them you can see are pretty tight together because there's no radius left. Here you can see the top of that, where that comes down. And one of the other things that you can see here is this piece of plywood in oak. So if I come on over to this side, and of course I've already, started using it for other things besides just a table saw or a bandsaw. So here's that piece of oak coming out. So that oak is screwed directly into the 2x4s on the side, and another video will show that a little better. I've added a piece of oak up here to really strengthen the plywood that was there originally, and oak up front. Originally, the arms that came out to support this only came out to here, so they didn't fully support this. So by comparison now, it's just almost like rock solid. It's not steel, it's wood, but so it's not unbelievably rock solid. So that upper portion I have strengthened quite a bit. So another thing I did too is I wasn't terribly excited about the table pivot, although I don't necessarily see myself pivoting the table frequently, but I added my own version of trunnions. So just yesterday I chased down some handles. Now one nice thing is, and this was factory, is it's got a lag bolt back here that you can adjust up or down. So when I bring this back around and push it down, we're at 90 degrees on the blade, tabletop to blade. So that's really cool. Originally, the blade guard on the side here wasn't stepped out like I've got it. And I don't know if the blade was initially closer. I don't believe it really was, because I used the same back piece, which would have had the same spacing, but it seemed like there wouldn't have really been enough space on here. So I spaced it out about 1/4 inch, and it still, locks it down. Another thing on the hinges here, the hinges used to actually stick in between this piece of wood and this piece of wood, so there was a gap, which seemed like we were not gaining the strength of tying those two pieces together really well with glue. So this whole section is now glued together, not just screwed, but glued and screwed together. Because I took just a tiny bit of material off so I could actually glue those two pieces together. Inside, I added a bunch of support down here. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to mess with the bearings, which are back here, and I put in new bearing blocks, which I think there's another video that shows those a little better. But just wanted to really tie from this support that holds the bearing blocks to prevent the whole unit from kind of wobbling around. You can see on the back side, I've got 2x4 that runs almost the full height, and there's also a 2x4, kind of see it back in there, as well as supporting that corner. So those two corners are supported much better than they were, because before they were only a single screw, like you see here, going into the edge of the plywood. And there, of course, there were several up and down the side, but it still just didn't seem that supportive. So having the 2x4s in there. Now, originally it was completely tear apartable because you could unscrew every screw in the whole thing, and the entire thing came out into all the pieces. Well, so because the spine is on this side is all glued. And so anything that's connected to that side is also glued. So I added also this 2x4, and the 2x4s are laying this way, not up and down. A perimeter all the way around, and then put this piece of 1/2-inch ply on there, and it's all glued and screwed together as well. But between here and this side, and between here and the back, those are just screwed, they're not glued. So that can actually still come apart. The casters, of course, are screwed in with 1/4-inch lag bolts in through this and into the ply, just a little ways. And because everything is so much stronger now, so much more reinforced than it was originally, where the plans that I found, well, actually I didn't find plans, I only found advertisement for plans, which were $1 only called for a maximum of a 1/2 horse motor, and I put a 3/4 horse Grizzly motor in it. So a little bit heavier duty. It's a 4-to-1 gear ratio. So it's got a 2.5-inch gear, no, a 2-inch pulley, I should say, on the motor, and a 10-inch wheel. I was right, 2.5-inch on the motor, 10-inch on the wheel, so 4-to-1, 1750 RPM motor. So we're getting a little over 2,000 linear feet of blade travel, versus a lot of the newer units are getting 3,000 feet. The unit originally was only calling for a, what should I say here? It was only calling for a maximum of I think it was a 1/4-inch blade. So from the back to the front of the teeth, 1/4 of an inch, might have been 3/8. I wanted to be able to do some resawing with it, and I haven't actually done any resawing yet, other than on a piece of plywood that was about this tall, sliding it through, and it had no problem with that. And I'm using a 3/4-inch wide Timberwolf blade. Anyway, slid that through this way, and I mean, it just cuts through there like butter. But of course, it's soft plywood, so it, certainly not hardwood, which I'd like to be cutting some mahogany down, probably from only really 4 or 5-inch wide blocks anyway, into 3/8 strips. So anyway, that pretty much is all the things I did to it. I did add a place to put the old headset, added a 1/4-inch dowel up here to hang the power cable. And, oh, and I also, one other last thing, well, not last quite, added in this little house here, which just unscrews and pulls out. And this is my vacuum system. So it's got a 2¼ inch hole, or for normal 2-inch vacuum hose. Slides up and in. Whoops. And locks down. So then there's a spot up here you can see where the air pulls in, and over here. And then the little tube that was inside there, actually, let me rotate the table. So you can see in here, I created a direct tube, kind of just glued some PVC electrical pipe together. And that gives me a direct vacuum right on the actual tire to keep the dust off the tire. And you can see it has already been running because there's already a bit of a groove there from the blade, or at least wear mark, I guess you could say. So, and it cuts very straight. It's a lot smoother than it was. I balanced out the wheels, not perfect, but a fair amount. And the last thing actually is I made new blade guides. So these are kind of nothing terribly special, but it gives you adjustment forward and back from this knob, and then this guy changes the location forward and back for the thrust bearing. And thrust bearings are nothing more than, I don't know, $5-6 a pack for 8 roller skate bearings, or roller blade bearings, or skateboard bearings, whatever you want to call them. And the rest of it is maple. I left just a little bit of it finished in the original color. This actually used to be a headboard that I made in 8th grade out of solid maple. And that same headboard also became part of the hammer dulcimer that I made. So, and below here is also this is the same thing down below, or at least similar, only upside down. Let's see, because I did the trunnion, originally the table literally was split this way. Because I did the trunnion, and the split used to be, where the hinge point used to be kind of a goofy hinge mounted about here and here, wasn't near as solid this way as the trunnion makes it. I needed to have a different way of bringing the blade out, because I can't bring it straight out this way because it would need to come right through the middle of the trunnion, which it can't do. So instead, I just put that all together, used a bunch of screws to tie it together, and then had the blade coming out this direction, and then put 6 screws and a piece of oak down below to hold the table nice and flat. The guy who gave it to me said that he'd replace the tabletop, but the tabletop is actually pretty flat. It's not perfect. And of course, maybe it could be sanded down a little bit closer to really nice, but for what I'm going to do with it, I think it's very adequate, at least for the time being. And so that's my upgrade.